Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Town Hall. Welcome to our special council meeting of Tuesday, February 24th. I'm going to be calling our meeting to order at 5 p.m. We're going to start with a moment of silent reflection and just a few words before we do that. Today marks 4 years since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, a sovereign and democratic country. We commend the bravery and resilience of the Ukrainian people. We acknowledge the immense suffering, the immense needless suffering and loss of life, and we stand with our sister city, Nadvirna, and all people in Ukraine in our steadfast support, prayers, and hopes for peace. Thank you. Moving on to our land acknowledgement, the municipality of Port Hope exists on the lands of the Mishisagik Anishinaabe traditional territory covered by the Williams Treaties. We honor and recognize First Peoples as rights holders and stewards of the lands and waters on which we have the privilege to live, work, and play, including the Ganaraska Forest and River. We pay respect to elders past, present, and emerging. We commit to actions towards truth and reconciliation by recognizing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, strengthening ties with First Nation, Métis, and Inuit peoples, especially those who make their home in Port Hope, and learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and being. We do so by recognizing the past and working towards a shared future. Moving on to the next item, do any members have any pecuniary interest before we begin this afternoon's meeting? Seeing none. Moving on to item number 3, which is delegations. It's now time for delegations. We have one delegation on the agenda tonight, and the delegation has requested extra time, and I have granted this request. So item 3.1, Kevin Killen representing the Garden Hill Neighborhood Group. And I'll ask Kevin to please approach the podium and give the delegation, and just make sure the button's on. There we go.
Okay. Okay, thank you, Mayor and Council, for listening to me today. And I'd like to thank all of our neighbors for coming out here and supporting us in this cause. Just as an introduction for anybody who doesn't know me, my name's Kevin Killen. I'm a professional geoscientist. I've been working on designing projects for environmental reclamation, mining projects, cleanups, radiation monitoring, groundwater mapping for almost 39 years.
Kevin, can I just ask you to come a little bit closer to the mic,
Sure.
Just so that we can capture everything that you're saying accurately? Thank you.
Sure. Is that better? Okay. How's that? That's better. Okay. So what I wanted to do is just go over the reasons why that we want to keep the dam and present a case to repair the dam as quickly as possible for a host of different reasons. Repair is going to preserve a historic asset, and decommissioning it will permanently erase a functioning ecosystem. There's a lot of heritage that goes into the Garden Hill Dam. It was first constructed in 1861, and there's been several versions of the same dam since then due to fires, reconstruction. In 1959, the GRCA built the current dam for water storage, cattle watering, and recreation. There is a legal agreement from the landowners on this. The reservoir is also part of the 37-acre Garden Hill Conservation Area, and its history is a dedicated space for naturalist members of the community. It's not, it's not a swimming pool. The pond is a beautiful feature. It's an ecosystem. It's also one of the rural community safety features. The infrastructure that resides there is used for rural firefighting. Okay, the pond is the primary water source for rural fire suppression, and the rural community relies on this existing fire dry hydrant located on Mill Street. There's no other water storage structure in the area currently available, and the municipality would be forced to invest in alternative infrastructure. So again, repair will maintain this essential public safety, and decommissioning creates new risks in building infrastructure and a new financial burden for Port Hope. I've pulled some pictures out of the GRCA report from October 25th by Corey Harris for reference here. So this shows the dam this summer after it has been repaired. 2026 was the first year that is supposed to be in the dam repair schedule. So the numbers that I have here may not be accurate anymore. These are pulled out of the report. I'm sorry if they're not correct, but it does give an idea that the decommissioning and the repair numbers are very, very close together. The one difference is that there is no EA required in the plan to repair the dam. If we go about the plan to repair the dam, to decommission the dam, there's many environmental and financial uncertainties. The current ecosystem is thriving as well, and repair avoids triggering a large-scale environmental disturbance. It's a nesting ground for many different species of turtles, swans, ducks, fish, everything that we can see in the pictures here. It's a migration route for different species, and people come all throughout the year to see this. There's constantly cameras at the fire hydrant looking at different things, the birds, the geese that are populating the pond. And it's a year-round thing, as we can see in the winter 2020 there. And even a few days ago, we have 8 trumpeter swans. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the 1958 contractual easement that applies to the successors of the vendor in the north of the pond, giving access to the pond. Removing the pond would make the easements unavailable. There's no pond, there's no easement. Okay, and these are, this is my same buddy Igor. I'll just call him Igor. He travels across my property twice a year. This would be the last time that we would see him if the pond was decommissioned. Okay, he goes across my property to the Morton Pond every year in May and August. Decommissioning will end the cycle for many circles and many migratory, many migratory species. As we can see, the scope and ramifications are not small. The rehabilitation or making smaller ponds over the 15 to 20 acre pond isn't a trivial project. There's silty, dirty, contaminated pond bottom sediments need to be removed in order for access to the pond to be made. There could also be health concerns for local with different, with exposure of the lake bottom sediments there, with fecal matter. And then what happens when it dries out in the summer and these things become airborne? Will we be able to protect the local species? These things all become part of the ramifications of decommissioning this dam. There's also human ramifications. I'm sure council is tired of hearing about this, but these things are all self-inflicted. We have water concerns up there. We have water concerns, septic concerns, and now we have an additional water hydrogeological concern, where we're going to change the water table if we decide to decommission the dam. Repair still remains the current, maintains the current groundwater stability. Decommissioning is an unknown. An EA is at best a guess on what the impact to the area will be. It is not a guarantee. There's also infrastructure ramifications. Firefighting infrastructure has changed. Will it have the reliability and volume of the current pond? That's an unknown. Residents are going to be hit with higher insurance premiums if the firefighting infrastructure changes. Other financial impacts that the changes are inflicting on the residents, such as many residents lost their conservation land tax incentive program in the area simply because the ANSI boundary was moved. Our taxes went up. It feels like Garden Hill is being bullied. What happens to the adjoining shallow and dug wells within this area? There's several on Mill Street and on County Road number 9, and they're not all drilled shallow wells. Okay, the repairs maintain the current groundwater stability. Decommissioning, again, is an unknown. An EA, again, is a best guess. Paths forward. This is out of the GRCA report last year. So what you'll see on the left-hand side, year 1 and year 2 at the top, is for repair. Again, that's a known path. The bottom is the decommissioning, and that's unknown risks. If you notice, there is no EA required for the repair of the dam. There is a study, there is the geotechnical requirement to ensure the safety, but we do not need an EA. Okay? There's no new environmental impact. There's no firefighting impact. Its immediate plans can be made, and it can enhance the safety of the downstream residents. Decommissioning, huge environmental impact, unknown costs. We don't know what happens when you go to rehabilitate the area. There is no guarantee. What's under that water and sediment? Nobody knows. And then there's other complicating issues as well. Okay, so the proposed subdivision will likely have an effect on the environment, so the EA may be a waste of money. Council is going to be changing. Advancing in a decisive direction would be preferable to delaying for next council, re-educating and starting the process again. Meanwhile, the dam is going to be eroding, leaking, and the stop logs, which need to be replaced, could fail. So again, repair maintains the current groundwater stability and is the safest path forward. And there's an error on this slide. I'm sorry, the first paragraph is a word salad, but I missed it. But we don't believe an EA is necessary. And GRCA presented this as being only needed to decommission. So please pursue the funding that is needed and complete the geotechnical review to maintain the current environment and the water table. Find the funds. It's a multi-generational fix for the area. The next dam, this next dam will also last generations. It's going to last longer than any road we decide to put down. Why does it matter now? It's a continuation of the current infrastructure and environment. If we don't do it now, things are going to be delayed, especially if there's a new council coming in. There's safety issues that have been identified and they need to be addressed now. Maintains the fire infrastructure, and we've also already lost one headwater pond up in the Garden Hill area at Ganaraskin 9 and County Road 10. So there's a lot of benefits to not doing an EA and just proceeding with the repair of the dam. The repair is the known, controllable, and defensible path. If we don't fund this repair and we start the assessment today, we aren't saving $340,000. We're not saving anything. We're instead accepting the risk of a multi-million-dollar liability, the loss of our village's fire protection, and an environmental disaster that can't be undone. Inaction is the most expensive decision you can make today. Repair will protect a functioning ecosystem and functioning infrastructure. There's two possible visions of the future right there. That really says it all. And I do love this quote on the slide. Council's decision should not be based solely on incurred costs. It must also consider the long-term value to the community, the integrity, the durability of the outcome. And this was in one of the reports earlier this year. So as in closing, the Garden Hill neighborhood, we would like to move the council direct staff to allocate the necessary funds for the geotechnical assessment required to initiate year one repair of the Garden Hill Dam, and further, that this action be prioritized to address the critical structural leakage identified in the GRCA inspection report, ensuring both the stabilization of the municipal fire suppression assets and the preservation of the surrounding natural environment. Thank you.
Thank you for the, and we're going to withhold applause. Please withhold your applause. We've just finished updating our bylaws on this, and by clapping is not allowed in the council chamber. I do want to acknowledge, thank you very much for coming to do this presentation. And it was also a suspension of rules to ensure that this delegation was heard. And we also did accommodate extra time for this delegation to be heard in its entirety. So I do want to make sure that everybody is aware of that. Moving around the table, I'm going to ask for questions and comments from my colleagues. Councillor Lass.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. When this was presented to us a few weeks ago to council, we all looked at each other and said, well, hold on a second. You know, we are the least experienced, qualified to make a decision on which way to go. So let's bring in the user group, the county, GRCA, and our First Nations. And let's have an all-out discussion about, you know, what are the pros, what are the cons. You've presented a very good case in your presentation, but all the questions you're asking may have to be answered in an EA. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from around the table at this point? Councillor Darrell, you look like you might want to. You're going to hold for a minute? Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation. We appreciate your time and effort being here this evening. Yes, you may comment back to Councillor Lass.
Okay, thank you. The one thing that you brought up is that an EA will answer my questions. In reality, there isn't a lot of questions that I brought up. In reality, I'm saying that this is the best path forward because the EA is the only reason to do the EA is to study the decommissioning of the dam. It's only required to have a geotechnical study in order to repair the dam, which would be the best path forward environmentally and would also give council some kind of defensible report.
And thank you for that. And all I'm saying is that when GRCA gets up and makes their presentation, we'll probably hear the counterpoint to that.
Okay.
Thank you, Ken.
Thank you.
Thank you. And the recommended motion in front of us is to receive the delegation for information. So can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Less, seconded by Councillor Darrell. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item number 4, items for consideration, 4.1, presentation by Corey Harris, Watershed Service Coordinator, Ganaraska Region Conservation Authority, GRCA, Peter Deshane, Manager of Infrastructure, and Denise Marshall, Director of Public Works, Northumberland County. And I would please ask that the delegation come to the front, or if there's a speaker on behalf of the group, please proceed.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm going to be speaking I'm going to be speaking to most of the slides, but there are 3 slides in the deck that the county will speak to. So I wanted to thank Council for the opportunity to speak to you tonight and I guess give an update and an overview of the issue with the Garden Hill Dam. Doesn't seem to be advancing. It's the big one. Okay, there we go. So just a brief outline. I want to give a brief recap of the October 21st presentation to Council. Speak about the collaboration between GRCA and the county. I know that was a question that had been raised. Talk about our funding challenges. Touch on the WECI fund. Highlight the initial cost estimates presented previously, and then talk about the new Class EA option. As most folks know, the GRCA constructed the Garden Hill Dam on the North Ganaraska River within Garden Hill in 1959. The structure was part of the reconstruction of County Road 9. The dam outlets within a large box culvert, a 12 by 12 meter box culvert that the county owns. And the original purpose of the structure was to manage flows in the North Ganaraska River, provide recreational opportunities, and provide habitat for wildlife. The conservation area is 54 acres in size, and the reservoir is approximately 38 acres of that 54. I had noted in October that the reservoir is used by the Port Hope Fire Department. There is a dry hydrant there that is off of Mill Street. I think that's common knowledge now. The ownership of the outlet structure is largely owned by the GRCA. We actually own the control building and the actual the stop logs and the gains associated with that. The roadway is owned by the county and managed by the county. The 2 structures are connected, which makes this an interesting asset to manage. Back in 2023, we received a small amount of funding from the Water and Erosion Control Infrastructure, or WECI fund, to retain a consultant to complete a formal dam inspection and prepare a summary report. That report included a number of recommendations. Based on the condition of the dam, it helped us assess risk levels of the dam and the potential for component failure. Some of those recommendations applied to GRCA's infrastructure, some applied to the county's culvert. GRCA and the county staff have been having discussions since September 2025 to look at how do we coordinate and collaborate on addressing the recommendations from the report. So there was a pretty big shopping list in the report. I'm not going to go through all these items, but it recommended a series of issues that needed to be addressed. There are significant costs associated with addressing these items. And the initial cost estimates were in the ballpark of over $500,000. The last point there, the staging work and material costs, we estimated it originally at $100,000. I've been looking at quotes for that work, and I got a quote last week that was over $300,000. So I reiterated last time that these are high-level costs, and I'd obviously be getting more quotes, but there was a bit of sticker shock with that. So the report also identified these key features that are being impacted that need attention. Just to highlight on the left, there's the wing walls as the flow enters the dam. There's concrete that's failing in the joints. There's a pier in the center of the dam that separates the 2 stop log bays. The concrete is crumbling in those locations, as well as the wall for the control building is deforming. I highlighted in October as well that the stop logs are in rough condition. We've replaced, when we did the drawdown in 2023, we replaced the top 7 logs. But the bottom logs are likely original to 1959, 1960. What makes this very challenging, it's not a simple thing to replace the stop logs. We've got to draw down the whole entire reservoir. That was maybe an oversight in the original design. There's no valves we can rely on. There's no other way to isolate the area to get the water levels down to remove the logs without having an impact on the reservoir. And we've obviously put some thought into, we only would want to draw down the reservoir once to do as much work as needed and avoid and minimize impacts to the reservoir. There is a lot of sediment that's accumulated over the 66 years of the reservoir. There's probably, in all honesty, 160 years of sediment, and in addition to whatever the geese are contributing. But yeah, there would be some need to manage that material. Just to give a sense of the complicated nature of replacing the logs, this is a side view of the dam, the flow directions from the right to the left. And the normal water levels shown there, when we drew down the levels in 2023, we took the 7 top logs out. And for us to get a repair done, we're looking at drawing everything down right to the bottom. To mitigate impacts to the reservoir and the aquatic life within the reservoir, we'd have to install a cofferdam, pump flows over and around the cofferdam, and dewater a work area. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleagues at the county, let them speak to a few slides.
Thank you, Corey, and thank you, Your Worship. It's a pleasure to be here tonight and just talk about the county's asset, which is the culvert that Corey had mentioned before. Corey already touched on the collaboration that we've done to date since September of 25 and working together to explore different options to rehabilitate both the dam and the culvert. And by working together, there'd be significant cost savings achieved through all the processes, engineering, design, construction, for mob and demobilization costs, dewatering, and traffic control. Oop, wrong way. So what is the county doing this year moving forward? So in 2025, the county had set aside $50,000 for design and tender for the culvert rehabilitation. In 2026, the budget includes $1 million for the rehabilitation. And we're currently planning to move forward with a geotechnical investigation that will support both the design for the culvert and the dam. And we're also planning to move ahead with a structural assessment that would include a detailed defect mapping, concrete coring, etc. And that will also support the design of the culvert rehabilitation. I'm sure most of you probably are aware, but just wanted to highlight how the funding arrangement works. So historically, what's in place now has been in place for decades to our knowledge, and that's where the municipality and the province fund GRCA. Also, I'm sure you're all aware that both the county and member municipalities have separate budgets for their assets and services that they provide, and that member municipalities collect the local and county portions of property taxes, and then that's transferred to the county quarterly. And I'll turn it back over to you, Corey.
Thanks, Peter. So in my October presentation, you saw a version of this graph, and I've expanded it just to paint a picture of some of our funding challenges at GRCA. Originally, when the Conservation Authority was set up in 1946, the funding arrangement with the municipalities and the province was roughly 50-50. That was a kind of a founding principle of the conservation authorities. 1995 came along, and there was a major turning point brought forward under the Red Tape Reduction Act, where the conservation authorities' funding was drastically reduced from approximately $50 million province-wide to just around $8 million. This cut forced a fundamental change in the CA's funding model and significantly impacted the CA's ability to fund maintenance of infrastructure. These costs were essentially downloaded and the burden was transferred to the municipalities. So when you look at the 1995-96 provincial cuts of 80%, that brought our provincial budget down to about $103,000 a year. There were additional cuts of 50% that occurred in 2019. So our provincial funding now is $51,863 annually. So not a lot you can do with the dam with $51,000. So that's just a reality. I'm not saying anything political. It's just a financial reality and where we're at. When you look at how the authorities funded, you can see in blue there's the provincial funds, municipal levies in green. Other funding like self-generated funding is in the dark blue. And I put the consumer price index on there just to show how things compare with inflation. If you look at the Conservation Authority's budget by percentage, 100% at the top. The municipal levies in green is roughly 35% on average, but it ranges from 25 to 45, 50%. So it's clear that municipalities have been our faithful partner over the life of the authority. When you look at the provincial funding in blue, those 1995-96 cuts really show up, and you can just see how that provincial funding piece is almost gone. Less than 1% of our budget is provincial dollars. The average for conservation authorities in Ontario is roughly 3%. I think most people aren't aware of that. It's important to point out that's why I'm before you asking for support. Because of those cuts, the province started the WECI program, the Water and Erosion Control Infrastructure Program. So that was started in 2003, and it was intended to be a capital cost share program with municipalities to provide matching funding to conservation authorities for major maintenance or related studies. And you notice it's a cost share program with municipalities, not conservation authorities, because we didn't have resources to put into that. So it was, I think, made to adjust or adapt to this new reality. There's roughly 900 dams and flood control channels in Ontario, which are valued at around $4 billion. And each year, the 36 conservation authorities compete for those $5 million. So if you're successful in that application process, the 50% of funds from your local municipality is matched with 50% from the province. So back in October, I presented a couple options to council. We've already kind of seen this, but I just wanted to reiterate. So this estimate was for dam repairs. These numbers came out of the discussions between the county and the consultant. Estimated cost for the work for repairs in the ballpark of $700,000 when you look at all things combined. So that would be shared 50-50 with the municipality and the province through the WECI funding. As mentioned earlier by Peter, the county will be moving ahead with the geotechnical investigation of the road embankment this year and exploring design solutions for the culvert. The second option I presented in October was for potential decommissioning. And this is where we suggested looking at a Class EA to look at decommissioning options. When you look at the total cost of this approach, we're in the ballpark of $650,000, also shared 50-50 with the municipality and the WECI program. So a third option was recently brought forward for discussion, which is different than the previous EA option. This is not an EA just looking at decommissioning, it's an EA looking at a full suite of issues. One of the reasons this was brought forward is that when council was considering the two previous options of repair or decommissioning, there were concerns expressed that deciding between the two options without community consultation is a problem. To address this concern, GRCA presented this option that a WECI application be submitted to look at the various options between do nothing, repair, maybe repair with a bottom draw, decommission with stream rehabilitation, or decommission with various other mitigation options to mitigate the loss of the habitat of within the pond and the reservoir, create other features in those areas to mitigate also the loss of the dry hydrant. I should have put a slide in the presentation tonight to give an overview of a Class EA process, but it is a very reliable and robust process. It's intended to help proponents evaluate potential environmental impacts, deal with issues in the categories of natural, social, economic, cultural, and built impacts before proceeding with a preferred option. It involves public consultation, assessment of alternatives, mitigation planning, and then selecting a preferred alternative out of that. So I want to be clear that this EA option isn't focused on just decommissioning. We would very much like to keep the repair option in that process. And I think that's something that's not coming through in some of the discussion. And I want to be very clear that GRCA does not have a preference as to which way to go on this. We're neutral. We would follow the guidance provided by the EA process. I should just highlight a couple things quickly too, that there was reference to a purchase agreement. We've been actually able to find the deed for the purchase of the conservation area property. It does not include the clauses or items that were referenced in the purchase agreement. So I just want to clarify that point. And also, just when it comes to groundwater impacts, I think there needs to be some more discussion on what are the actual impacts of the reservoir, like how significant is that on adjacent wells. We have a monitoring well, a provincial monitoring well right in the conservation area. And when we drew the water level down, when the boards came out in 2023, that dropped the water level by about 1.4 meters. And our monitoring well only dropped by about 5 centimeters. So we know there's a connection, but we don't know the sensitivity of that connection and how that would affect other people's properties. That would be an issue that we would look at closely in an EA process and make sure that mitigation of those impacts are fully considered with any option being brought forward. So just in summary, I'd want to, just make it clear that the position of the GRCA is that the Class EA process is the best path forward, as the technical data, information, public engagement, and input will chart the best path forward, one that is reviewing and assessing environmental, economic, cultural, and community considerations. I should also highlight, we've been contacted by the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation. They have expressed an interest in considering decommissioning. So it's put us in a position where we value the input of the Garden Hill residents, but we also value the input of our Indigenous partners. So it's very difficult to make a decision without a proper process. So with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you for that presentation. We very much appreciate it. And we will open up to questions and comments. And I do want to also acknowledge that Councillor Clare is online. I'm going to start off with a question, and it's in relation to what you were saying about the WECI funding and the number of dams that are currently in the province and the limited resource of that fund. And so I'm wondering if you can share with us, for the public record, what percentage of applications are actually successful, given that the demand exceeds the funding that is available?
It's a great question. I don't know that I could give you a specific percentage, Your Worship. I know that the WECI committee is made up of staff from M&R, Conservation Ontario, and the conservation authorities. They have a ranking system and a scoring system that they use for the applications. Applications that are high risk get a very high score. So they are trying to manage the risk associated with the infrastructure by what they fund. So there are a lot of applications that don't get funded, but the ones that are high risk usually are successful quite quickly.
And do I hear you saying that it's in your opinion that this is a high-risk application?
I would suggest that it is a high risk. I mentioned in October we've stopped or reduced the amount of leakage from the dam by MacGyvering a situation with vapor barrier and other things. It's preventing maybe the failure of those boards at this time, but it is just a matter of time before those stop logs discharge more water than they can hold back, and that would cause the water level to drop.
Thank you for that. I'm looking around. I think there's going to be lots of questions and comments, and I do also believe that we have a staff comment or intervention. I don't know if the CAO, before we go around the horseshoe, if you want to just make a comment.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I appreciate that. Corey did reference the letter from the Scugog Island First Nations, and I just wanted to address that. That letter council now has in their hands. We are going to post that publicly on our council information index so that everyone has it available. I do want to highlight that we really, from a staff perspective, we appreciate the traditional environmental knowledge that is shared through that and the collaboration with the First Nations, so I appreciate that. I do want to read out just a portion of that letter just for the public as part of this conversation, if that's okay.
CAO, could you put the mic just a
Sure.
little bit closer
Just a little
so
bit
that
closer, is
everybody
that
can
better?
hear you? Thank you.
Okay, sure. There are concerns that the Ganaraska River is an important cold water watershed supporting significant populations of both native and naturalized trout and salmon, the Lake Ontario Atlantic Salmon Restoration Program, and identified as a priority watershed for lake sturgeon restoration. They do highlight a few negative impacts to the Ganaraska River, but not limited to. Thermal impacts upwards to 10 degrees Celsius warming occurring within the pond head, significant population of the mystery snail within the pond head, fragmentation of the native brook trout habitats, long-term asset management and maintenance costs, and particularly impacts to rights-based reconciliation with the First Nations. So they're requesting engagement with the municipality and GRCA on wholesome rights-based consultation on the future of the dam to acknowledge some of these stressors. And they appreciate the municipality is not the owner of the dam, but is a partner and a board member of the GRCA with good standing relationship with the Scugog Island First Nations. So they're willing to provide traditional knowledge and other resources to support the health, resiliency, and opportunities to enhance right-based reconciliation within the watershed. So I did want to share that for public record, and we acknowledge the receipt of this email letter, and we appreciate their input on the traditional knowledge that they want to share.
Thank you to the CAO, and I'm going to start around the horseshoe in this direction with Councillor Todd. We'll just see if we can get some technology working here.
It's working now.
Okay.
I'm on. Thanks, Corey. Appreciate your presentation. I want to dig in a little bit on the EA, if I could. In your presentation, you said that there's going to be sort of 4 options. Do nothing, which probably isn't going to be one of our options. Repair it, decommission it, and then decommission it with mitigation. Is it possible to decommission it without mitigation, given the fact that we do have, a fire dry hydrant in there? Is that even a possibility, or are we really down to two options?
Through you, Mayor Hankivsky, I should be clear too, the options, those are concept options that would be formalized with additional public input. So there could be 5 or 6, depending on what the community wants to evaluate. I put those up as a starting point. But to your point, I think decommissioning without any mitigation is probably not realistic, but I think mitigation could take many forms. It could be pocket wetlands in the floodplain, which is very inexpensive. It could be something as creating, ponds on either side of the corridor to maintain amphibian and turtle habitat, as well as maintain waterfowl habitat and a fire supply. So, yeah, it's a good point.
Perfect, thanks. Okay, great. So then, just to help me understand the EA, because that's really where I need to understand. So the EA, would it necessarily disclose any new data related to the repair? Okay. Would it necessarily disclose any new data related to the repair option? Or is it really to help us understand the decommission option and that better?
I think it could provide additional information and other things to consider for the repair option, because I touched on something like a bottom draw. So if the dam was to be repaired and in place, temperature is an issue that's been identified, as is sediment movement. So if we were to put a valve, like build a valve into the stop logs at the bottom of the dam, you could mitigate the temperature and the sediment issue by doing that. So that's one way to look at a repair option.
Okay, I'll circle back to Councillor Less, and we'll continue around.
Yeah, I was just going to summarize what I've heard so far is that the residents are looking for repair without an EA. First Nations is sort of maybe leaning to decommissioning, and GRCA is saying we need to put it through a proper process to understand what the EA will provide us with in terms of community engagement. It's not focused on decommissioning or repair. It's going to be open-minded, and there could be a groundwater impact that we know nothing about at this stage that could come out. Is that correct?
So through you, Mayor Hankivsky, that's been raised as a potential issue. We have a hydrogeologist on staff. We have looked at that just at a high level, and we work closely with the folks at the Oak Ridges Marine Groundwater Program. They've provided mapping showing groundwater contours through that whole area. The groundwater movement through Garden Hill around this pond is predominantly north to south on the east side and northwest to southeast on the west side. I think the dam does have a very localized impact, but the predominant direction of groundwater flow is north to south. So by removal, like if for example, the water level is drawn down, the impacts we suspect would be very minimal, because the groundwater supply in that direction of flow is north to south. That would be something we'd want to confirm as part of the EA process, but that assertion doesn't agree with some of the information we have.
Councillor Clare, I know you're virtual, but you're next around the horseshoe. Do you have any comments or questions?
Thank you. Yes, I did have a follow-up question about the water issue. When we're talking about the water, we do seem to be talking with the assumption that the dam is positively contributing to the water supply and quantity and quality right now. Is there any scenario where alternatives to what's currently there could could also have potential positive impacts in terms of groundwater recharge or reduced degradation of quality due to sediment or other contaminants that are there as a result of the existing dam.
So
And
you're-
is that something, I guess, that would come up in the EA?
I think it'd be discussed in the EA and maybe explored. But I don't know that, like the groundwater and the surface water, they are connected, but the well impacts and they appear to be somewhat separate from the issues with the pond. And I think dug wells, they're much shallower. They're the ones, if there is an impact, it's probably more susceptible in those dug wells. So I don't know if there's a benefit really that would impact. And sorry, I'm losing what your original question was. If you can boil it down and rephrase it, that would be helpful.
Yeah, sorry. And I could be more succinct too. Just really wanting to understand whether it is a given that the dam is having a positive effect currently or will in the future to the water issue. We know that's a very important concern for the Garden Hill community and the broader Port Hope community. So I'm curious to know whether the EA would be looking at that water issue beyond just the impact on existing wells from a negative perspective, but looking at that whole issue of water sustainability in that area.
Okay, thank you. I don't think it is a given from what information we have seen that there is a connection between the drinking water and water supply and the dam. But I would say that, I'm not a hydrogeologist. I would want to rely on an expert to confirm that. And it should be a item that's clearly discussed in the EA, just so that there's a fulsome explanation and a comfort level before we even introduce those options to be considered.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up, Councillor Clare, or are you okay for the moment? Okay. So I'm going to move to the other side of the horseshoe with Councillor Darrell.
My question is for Director Williams. We've heard a lot of talk about fire safety. I was just wondering for the public, if you could elaborate on any safety concerns in the community if that dry hydrant is no longer functional.
Thank you for the question and through the chair. If the hydrant was no longer functional, if we lost complete access to that pond, it would have a negative impact on our fire suppression activities. The Garden Hill Pond is our main source of water for that area of the municipality of Port Hope. We'd have to investigate other potential water sources, likely would be on private property, so we'd have to secure access to that property and invest in the new additional infrastructure for the dry hydrants that would be required. None of that work has taken place. It would be my hope if the EA process is undertaken, that would be included as part of the project, that we'd be looking at additional potential water sources if the pond was no longer available to us.
Councillor Adam. Deputy Mayor Adam.
Same thing. Thank you. Well, first off, I would like to thank Kevin for his presentation. Didn't get that opportunity, and thank Corey for that wonderful presentation as well. So I originally was going to ask a question that Todd was going to ask anyway, did ask anyway. So I'll skip over that and about different options that potentially the EA could come with different repair options, as well as maybe an opportunity for a different priced option. But I have a more specific question about the stop logs and the failure or the potential failure. What's the risk right now? Where are we looking at on a potential failure, and what your assessment is on that for a chance of that? And if there is a failure in the stop logs, what is the risk to the surrounding homeowners, and maybe more specifically to the south?
Certainly. Through you, Chair. The stop logs are in pretty rough shape, as I mentioned, but their deterioration, although it's rapid in the sense of infrastructure, it's the mechanism that's causing the leak is, as the water is flowing through the cracks, it's just eroding and dissolving the material in the logs. So that's happening at a rate that we can at least monitor it and track it. My I guess concern with like there's no way in knowing the timeline of how long these things will take place and how long it will occur for. And I think my bigger concern is the potential for groundwater getting into the bedding around the county's culvert. There is what appears to be some settling occurring on the east side, and that's going to be examined as part of the geotech work this summer. But to your question about the risks downstream, we do have an existing dam safety review. It's dated now. It's probably 10 years old. We did look at classifying hazard levels for the dam. We're obligated to do that as a dam owner. And the assessment looked at if there was a dam failure, although we didn't model it, we did look at some potential scenarios and assume if a 5-meter wall of water broke through the dam and went downstream, who gets impacted by that? And what that analysis showed was that there's no residential buildings that are affected by that, but there are 2 structures. I believe they're barns. So within a 2-kilometer stretch below the dam, there's 2 barns that get affected by a dam break.
And just a quick follow-up on that. If there were a failure and there was damage to those buildings, where's the liability at?
Wow. Through you, Chair, I suppose liability is with the GRCA. It's our dam. We're the managers of it, and we're taking reasonable steps to manage the risk, but yeah, we would be responsible for that.
Councillor Meek.
Thank you. So I don't have, my questions have all been taken. I do have a comment, but I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Do you want to go ahead with your comments?
No, I'll wait for all the questions. It's not really directed at Corey, so I'll wait till everybody finishes with their questions.
So going back around the table, yes, Councillor Todd.
Thank you. My question is actually for county. In the event that the dam fails and the road is ruined, obviously that's something that county ought to take into consideration. So I'm curious, what level of involvement is county interested in as we go through this decision? What seat at the table is county looking at?
Good evening, thank you. Through you, Mayor. So the county would be obviously a stakeholder at the table. As we said, the culvert is attached to the dam, so we want to continue working with GRCA and the municipality on the best way and path forward. I think, speaking to the EA option, that really allows us to look at all of the alternatives and weigh pros and cons of, again, the cultural, the social, the infrastructure impacts, the cost and feasibility of all the different options. So I think that is a really good path forward. And so we would want to be, again, a stakeholder at the table if we do proceed with the EA option.
Thank you. And I have one last question before we continue on. And that is, I note that you came forward in this delegation with the GRCA and the county, and I'm wondering why we don't have, as part of your presentation or delegation, any representation from Indigenous nations, given first and foremost that the municipality of Port Hope is a signatory to UNDRIP, and under UNDRIP, municipalities have a responsibility as signatories or supporters, Indigenous engagement in all matters, including land use planning.
So, through you, Chair, I guess the reason we don't have anyone formally here with us is that a process hasn't been started. We're in the phase of trying to secure funding to begin a project, but certainly if we are successful in getting some funding support and getting a successful WECI application through, we would be engaging not only the community but Indigenous partners in the EA process.
I appreciate that, but we've had a lot of stakeholders here today presenting their perspectives, so that's where that question came from.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Mink.
May I just comment to that? I think that, as I'm sitting here, I think that would have been more our responsibility as council when we made the motion to invite GRCA and county here, that we should have asked at that point for First Nations to come forward. I'm not sure why. I don't think that would be GRCA's responsibility.
I think it's a question for all of us to answer collectively, and so my question was to GRCA because the county came with GRCA, so it was a question, but I think it's a question for all of us to answer.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions or comments around the presentation? Okay. Seeing none, the recommended motion is on the agenda to receive this for information. Can I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Adams, seconded by Councillor Clare. All in favor? And that is passed unanimously. Moving on to item 4.2, staff report WE0226, Re Garden Hill Dam follow-up report on proposed environmental assessment and funding request. Is anybody going to speak to this, or are we going to just go to questions and comments?
Sorry. I think staff are supportive of the recommendation to move forward with the impact assessment or the environmental assessment, inclusion of the First Nations groups with their input to have that traditional knowledge, and I think it will give a broader, fulsome information to make an informed decision.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments regarding the staff report? Councillor Mink.
Thank you. So I have just some general comments that I want to make in general, and I want to thank for the great turnout that we have here today and address this larger issue. So I want to begin by acknowledging that I find myself in a particularly difficult position. I'm hearing 4 distinct narratives, and each of them are sincere, important, and rooted in care for our community and our watershed. So first, I want to say as a municipal councillor, particularly one in Ward 2, I absolutely hear the concerns raised by residents. The message from many has been clear: repair the dam, keep the pond, and avoid an environmental assessment. I respect that perspective. But at the same time, I admit that I'm a little surprised by it. For several years, the Garden Hill community has strongly advocated for hydrological studies, sub-watershed studies, and science-based decision-making. So an environmental assessment, in my opinion, is fully aligned with those same principles. And when it comes to the ANSI, the direction has been consistent to protect the natural landscape. An environmental assessment would determine whether to return the area to a natural state and whether that is the best course of action or not. So from where I'm sitting, these messages about watershed studies versus no EA is very conflicting, that message, as I sit here. Second, I'm hearing from community members, some staff, some council colleagues, that this is primarily a council and conservation authority responsibility, and it's not a municipal responsibility. So while that dam sits beneath a county road, the municipality still has obligations within the watershed. The county does not sit on the GRCA board, and they do not pay into or approve the levy. So the presence of the county road does not remove municipal responsibility. And third, I want to acknowledge that I am in a particular, I feel a very vulnerable position because I am on the board of the GRCA. I have served for almost 8 years, and I take the role seriously, objectively, not emotionally. I have a deep respect for GRCA staff, their expertise, their professionalism, and their recommendations. The fact that this situation is occurring in my municipality doesn't exempt me from that obligation. It does not permit me to react emotionally or fearfully with an election in sight. And then fourth, most importantly, is the perspective of Indigenous communities. Our land acknowledgement states that we honor First Peoples as right holders and stewards of lands and waters that we rely on. We commit to learning from Indigenous ways of knowing and working toward a shared future based on truth and reconciliation. These are not symbolic words. They are supposed to guide our decisions. I said at the last meeting that Indigenous knowledge and guidance must be a priority. If we're not prepared to uphold those values of our land acknowledgement, then, to be honest, we should not be reciting it at all. Scugog Island First Nation provided feedback on November 25th. That feedback should have been centered from the very beginning. Instead, some assumptions were made or this information was left out. The lack of early transparent engagement was an oversight and something that we can learn from. These conversations should have begun immediately after the delegation last fall by the GRCA. So at this time, an EA process, I believe that because we have not engaged collaboratively with all relevant stakeholders, the only responsible option is to move forward with an environmental assessment. The EA process is not a decision in itself. It is the tool that gives the information, transparency, and the consultation that is necessary to make a defensible and respectful decision that may not only change the that may or may not change the landscape of Garden Hill. It brings science, community voices, Indigenous knowledge, and fiscal responsibility together in one. So for these reasons, I'm not putting a motion on the table at this time until we have more fulsome discussion, but I believe we must proceed with the environmental assessment, and I will be asking for a recorded vote.
Thank you for that, Councillor Mink, and I may circle back to you for that motion. But in the meantime, let's see if there's any further comments or conversation. Councillor Less.
Well, I echo Councillor Mink's thoughts on the EA, and I would feel more comfortable making a decision based on the information we get from the AA, rather than to try and, you know, like there's a lot of passion here from a historical point of view, from the eco point of view. There's a scientific point of view. We don't know what the impacts on the water are going to be. We're only guessing at this stage. So I feel let's go with the experts and go with an EA.
Thank you, Councillor Less. Any further comments, thoughts on the matter? Councillor Clare, do you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you. First, thank you, Vicky. I think that was really well captured about the importance of the EA to this process. And I also support that path. I think, you know, from my perspective, what I had planned to say tonight was that I do see the importance of the EA from the perspective of linking the two projects between the county's responsibility for the culvert and as a linked structure and our responsibility for the dam itself. And I really don't feel that we have at this point a clear picture of how repair as is compares to alternatives, both from a life cycle cost perspective, but also in terms of long-term environmental impact. And I think we need the EA to surface that for us. And then finally, just the unsolicited input from First Nations, I think does signal that there's an interest in having a broader discussion about returning to the natural state versus maintaining this infrastructure. And I think they raised some legitimate concerns about other environmental considerations and impacts for the river itself. And I think we should welcome that engagement and formalize it as part of the broader public consultation that we would have through the EA.
Thank you, Councillor Clare. And I also want to just support Councillor Mink in her comments. I think we have shown ourselves to be a council that is very interested in evidence-informed decision-making. We are a council that has made a resolution to support UNDRIP, and as the author of our new land acknowledgement, I take very seriously those words, Councillor Mink, that you were reading out. So I'm going to turn it back over to you if you'd like to put a motion on the table.
Thank you. So the motion that I guess I would like to put on the table is as written. Do you want me to read it out? Or Council? It's written here, so it's on the agenda that council approve option 3 as noted in report WE-02-26 and authorize funding in the amount of $50,000 per year for 2 years, which is 2026 and 2027, totaling $100,000 to be funded from the Community Benefit Reserve Fund to support a class environmental assessment for the Garden Hill Dam to evaluate repair and decommissioning alternatives subject to a successful application to the Water and Erosion Control Infrastructure Program.
Thank you. We have a mover and a seconder and Councillor Adam. Any further discussion? All in favor? Oh, sorry. Yes, it is a recorded vote. I apologize. So I'm going to turn it over to the clerk.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. So Councillor Mink has requested a recorded vote, and the motion that Councillor Mink just read out, so I'm not going to do that again. So the motion was moved by Councillor Mink, was seconded by Deputy Mayor Pearson, and in accordance with the procedure bylaw, recorded vote procedure for this particular issue would be that I would call out your name and you would indicate yes or no to the motion that is currently on the floor. We will start with Councillor Andrews.
Yes.
Councillor Attridge.
Yes.
Councillor Holloway Wadwani.
Yes.
Councillor Mink.
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Pearson.
Yes.
Councillor Toms.
No.
Mayor Hankivsky.
Yes.
Madam Mayor, total yes votes 6, total no votes 1. The motion passes.
Thank you for that. Moving on then to our confirmatory bylaw, item number 5, 11/2026, confirm the proceedings of the special council meeting of February 24th, 2026. Can I get a mover and seconder for that? Moved by Councillor Adam, seconded by Councillor Todd. All in favor? That is passed. And now I am in a position to adjourn our special meeting at 6:11 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for being here in attendance this evening.